Hey, Holy Girls, welcome back to Holy Girl Talk. If you're a returning listener, thank you so much for coming back and spending this time with me again. I truly don't take it lightly that you're here, and if this is your first time listening, welcome. I'm really glad you found your way here. Holy Girl Talk is a space where we talk about God, scripture, womanhood, healing, confidence, and real life in a way that's honest, reflective, and grounded. You don't need to be loud to belong here. You don't need to perform. You're welcome exactly as you are. Before we get into today's episode, I want to say this. If you know a woman who struggles with confidence, comparison, or feeling like she has to prove herself all the time, please share this episode with her. Send it to the friend who's steady but overlooked, the one who's faithful but quiet, the one who doesn't feel the need to announce every move but still wants to walk boldly in her faith. This episode is for her. Today we're talking about Caleb, and if you've never heard his story before, that's completely okay. I'll walk you through it. Caleb is one of those figures in scripture who doesn't get a lot of attention, but when you really look at his life, you realize he embodies one of the strongest forms of confidence there is. Not loud confidence, not performative confidence, but quiet confidence, the kind that's rooted, steady, and deeply anchored in trust in God. This episode is for the women who don't always speak the loudest, but believe deeply. The ones who don't need applause to stay faithful. The ones who are consistent, resilient, and quietly courageous. Caleb's story reminds us that confidence doesn't have to be dramatic to be powerful. Let's get into it. So, let's set the scene for Caleb's story, especially if this is new to you. The Israelites are standing on the edge of the promised land, the land God had promised them for generations. Moses sends 12 spies to explore it. Their job is simple: go see what the land is like, then come back and report what they saw. All 12 spies walk through the same land. They see the same cities, the same walls, the same giants, the same challenges. Nothing is hidden from anyone. They all have access to the same information, but when they return, something interesting happens. 10 of the spies come back overwhelmed. They focus on the obstacles. They magnify the size of the giants. They talk about how impossible it all seems. Their report is rooted in fear. And then there's Caleb. Caleb doesn't deny the reality of what he saw. He doesn't pretend the land is easy. He doesn't minimize the challenges. But his response is different. He stands up and says, "We can certainly do it." Not because the task is small, but because he knows who God is. And that's what sets Caleb apart. Confidence isn't about ignoring difficulty, it's about perspective. Caleb sees the same giants, but he doesn't shrink. He sees the same walls, but he doesn't panic. His confidence comes from trust, not circumstances. This part of the story shows us something powerful. Confidence is not about what's in front of you, it's about what you're anchored to. Caleb is anchored in God's promise, not the size of the obstacle. The 10 spies see the giants and immediately shrink back. They describe themselves as grasshoppers in comparison. Their fear distorts their identity. Instead of remembering who they are and whose they are, they let what they see define them. Caleb sees the same giants, but he doesn't let them shrink him. And that's such an important distinction. Quiet confidence doesn't mean you're unaware of the challenge. It means you refuse to let the challenge redefine you. Caleb's statement, "We can certainly do it," is not hype. It's not arrogance. It's faith grounded in memory. He remembers what God has already done. He remembers God's faithfulness in the past. His confidence comes from history with God, not blind optimism. This is so relevant for modern life. So many of us struggle with confidence, not because we lack ability, but because we magnify obstacles until they drown out God's track record in our lives. We focus on what could go wrong instead of what God has already brought us through. Quiet confidence looks like seeing the obstacle clearly and still moving forward. It looks like acknowledging fear without surrendering to it. It looks like trusting God's character even when the situation feels intimidating. Caleb teaches us that confidence is not pretending giants don't exist, it's believing they're not bigger than God. One of the reasons Caleb's confidence stands out so much is because it's quiet. He's not arguing. He's not trying to dominate the room. He's not over explaining or convincing people with theatrics. While fear is loud, emotional, and contagious, Caleb's confidence is calm, steady, and grounded. And that contrast matters. Loud fear panics. Loud fear spirals. Loud fear demands agreement and reassurance. Quiet confidence, on the other hand, doesn't need validation. It doesn't need a crowd to agree. It simply stands firm. This is such an important word for our modern world, where confidence is often confused with volume. We live in a culture that rewards loudness, loud opinions, loud personalities, loud self promotion, and if you're not loud, it's easy to assume you're unsure, insecure, or behind. But Caleb proves that the deepest confidence is often the least performative. Quiet confidence doesn't rush to be seen. It doesn't need to announce itself. It doesn't crumble under pressure or inflate itself for attention. It's rooted in spiritual clarity, knowing what God has said and trusting Him enough to stand on it without fanfare. And for so many women, this is freeing. You don't have to become louder to be confident. You don't have to compete for space. You don't have to prove yourself constantly. Confidence that comes from God is steady, it's grounded, it shows up consistently, not dramatically. Caleb reminds us that when faith is secure, confidence doesn't need to shout. Even though Caleb speaks with confidence, the people don't follow him. And this is where the story gets real. The nation listens to the 10 fearful voices instead. Fear spreads faster than faith, doubt feels safer than trust, and as a result, Caleb finds himself standing in the minority, believing God while everyone else backs away. This is the cost of quiet confidence. Sometimes believing God means standing alone. Sometimes it means trusting Him, even when the crowd disagrees, when the room shifts, when the voices around you tell you to be realistic, cautious, or less hopeful. Caleb isn't rewarded immediately for his faith. He's not celebrated, he's not affirmed, he's simply faithful. And that can be hard. Because many of us are okay with trusting God as long as we're not the only ones doing it. We feel strong when others agree with us, encourage us, or validate our perspective. But what happens when your conviction puts you in the minority? When you're the only one saying, I still believe God? When your faith feels misunderstood or unsupported? Caleb's story reminds us that confidence rooted in God does not depend on consensus. It depends on conviction. You don't need everyone to agree with you in order to be right. You don't need the crowd to confirm what God already spoke to you. This section of the story speaks to the women who keep showing up faithfully even when it feels lonely. The ones who trust God quietly while others doubt loudly. The ones who don't give up just because encouragement is scarce. Caleb shows us that standing firm, even when you're standing alone, is a form of strength God deeply honors. Because of the people's fear, the entire nation ends up wandering in the wilderness for 40 years. And this part of Caleb's story is often overlooked, but it's so important. Caleb believed God, he was ready, he was prepared, and yet he still had to wait. 40 years. That's a long time to carry a promise without seeing it fulfilled, a long time to keep believing when nothing seems to be moving forward. And this is where so many women quietly struggle when you've done everything right, trusted God, stayed faithful, and yet the timeline stretches longer than you expected. Caleb's delay was not because of disobedience, it wasn't punishment, it wasn't a lack of faith, it was simply part of the journey. And that's such a freeing truth. Waiting does not mean you misunderstood God. Delay does not mean denial. A promise from God does not expire just because time passes. What makes Caleb's story so powerful is that he doesn't let the waiting turn into bitterness. He doesn't grow resentful. He doesn't disengage. He doesn't lower his expectations to protect himself from disappointment. He keeps walking with God year after year, trusting that what God spoke is still true. This section is for the women who feel like they're overdue, the ones who think, I thought I'd be further along by now. I thought this would have happened already. Caleb's life reminds us that God's timing is not rushed, but it is intentional. And what God has promised you is still alive, even if it's taking longer than you hoped. What stands out most about Caleb during those 40 years is not just that he waited, it's how he waited. He didn't complain his way through the wilderness. He didn't grow passive or disengaged. He didn't let disappointment turn into bitterness. Caleb stayed faithful. He stayed committed. He stayed spiritually strong. And that kind of waiting takes maturity, because it's one thing to trust God when things are moving. It's another thing to trust Him when life feels repetitive, quiet, and slow. Caleb didn't put his faith on pause just because the promise wasn't immediate. He kept walking with God in the ordinary, unglamorous seasons. This is where quiet confidence is formed, not in the big moments, but in the long ones, in the years where nothing dramatic happens, but faith is still required. Caleb's confidence didn't come from hype or momentum, it came from consistency. Day after day, year after year, he stayed aligned with God. And this speaks directly to modern life. Waiting seasons test us. They tempt us to lower our expectations, to stop believing as deeply, to protect ourselves by not hoping too much. But Caleb shows us that faithfulness during the wait is not wasted. It's strengthening you, it's stabilizing you, it's preparing you for what's next. Quiet confidence is built when you keep trusting God even when no one is watching. When you keep doing the right thing even when progress feels invisible. When you don't let time harden your heart. Caleb didn't just survive the waiting years, he grew stronger in them. After 40 years of waiting, after wandering, after watching an entire generation pass, Caleb finally arrives in the promised land. And this is the moment that tells you everything you need to know about his confidence. Caleb is 85 years old, and when it's time to claim his inheritance, he doesn't ask for the easy land. He doesn't look for comfort. He doesn't say, I've waited long enough, give me something simple. He says, give me this mountain. And not just any mountain, the very territory where giants still lived. That request alone reframes everything we think about confidence. Caleb isn't chasing ease, he's chasing fulfillment. He's not shrinking with age, time, or delay. He's standing just as firm as he did decades earlier. His strength didn't come from adrenaline or youth, it came from a long, faithful walk with God. This is such a word for women who feel like time has passed them by. For anyone who thinks maybe I missed my moment or maybe I should aim lower now, Caleb's life says no. If God promised it, you're still allowed to ask for it. Confidence rooted in God does not weaken with time, it matures. Give me this mountain is bold faith, but it's not reckless. It's faith informed by history. Caleb knows who God is because he's walked with him for decades. And that kind of confidence doesn't beg or hesitate, it stands calmly and asks, in modern life, this looks like refusing to shrink your dreams to fit comfort, refusing to talk yourself out of what God already spoke, refusing to settle just because waiting was long. Quiet confidence doesn't lower the bar. It trusts God enough to reach for what was promised, even when it's still challenging. When Caleb says, I am as strong now as I was then, he's not talking about physical strength alone. He's talking about spiritual steadiness, emotional resilience, confidence that has not been shaken by time, disappointment, or delay. And that's important because confidence rooted in emotion will always fluctuate. Some days you feel bold, other days you feel unsure. Some days you feel capable, other days you don't. But Caleb's confidence isn't emotional, it's anchored. His assurance comes from knowing God's character, not from how he feels in the moment. He doesn't rely on hype, motivation, or external affirmation to feel secure. He relies on what God has already proven to be true, and that kind of confidence lasts. This is such a powerful reminder for women today, especially in a world where confidence is often performative, where we're taught to feel confident first and then act. But Caleb shows us the opposite. He acts in faith first, and confidence follows, not because circumstances are easy, but because God is faithful. Quiet confidence looks like stability. It looks like not panicking when things feel uncertain. It looks like not needing constant reassurance. It looks like trusting God even when emotions fluctuate. Caleb knew who he was, and more importantly, he knew whose he was. And when your identity is rooted in God, confidence becomes steady instead of fragile. You're not easily shaken by comparison. You're not undone by waiting. You're not dependent on applause. You move with assurance because your trust is anchored somewhere deeper than feeling. If you're listening to this and you've ever felt overlooked, underestimated, or pressured to be louder just to be seen, I want you to hear this clearly. Quiet confidence is not weakness. It's strength that doesn't need permission. It's faith that doesn't need applause. Caleb's story is for the women who stay faithful even when they're not the center of attention, who trust God even when others are louder, faster, or more visible. Take a moment to reflect with me. Where in your life have you been steady but unseen? Where have you trusted God quietly while fear was louder around you? What promise are you still holding after a long wait? And if God invited you to ask boldly today, what would your mountain be? Caleb reminds us that waiting doesn't mean wasting, that consistency builds confidence, and that believing God over the long haul shapes a kind of strength that nothing can shake. You don't have to force confidence. You don't have to perform faith. You just have to keep walking with God. And if this episode resonated with you, or if you thought of someone while listening, please share it. Send it to the woman who doubts herself quietly, the one who's faithful but tired, the one who needs to know that God sees her steadiness and honors it deeply. One share can be the encouragement someone's been praying for. Thank you, Holy Girls, for spending this time with me today. Thank you for showing up, for listening with open hearts, and for choosing to walk with God, even when it's not flashy or fast. If you'd like to send in prayer requests, testimonies, or episode suggestions, you can email holygirltalkpodcast@gmail.com. And if you haven't already, make sure you're following Holy Girl Talk so you don't miss future episodes like this one. I'm praying that you walk with quiet confidence this week, that you trust God deeply, wait faithfully, and ask boldly when the time comes. And that you remember, God honors women who stand firm, stay faithful, and believe Him wholeheartedly. Until next time, Holy Girls, keep walking steady.